The hot May sun hung high over West Memphis, Arkansas. Three young boys, Steve Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, pedaled their bikes down the dusty paths of Robin Hood Hills, unaware that their carefree day would end in a nightmare. As they laughed and raced, their innocent voices echoed through the trees, swallowed by the dense woods where a darker fate awaited them. Later that evening, a frantic call came into the West Memphis Police Department. Dana Moore, Michael's mother, her voice trembling with panic, said, "My son hasn't come home. None of them have. Please, you've got to find them." Officer Michael Jones scribbled down the details, trying to maintain his composure. "We'll do everything we can, ma'am. We'll start the search right away." The next morning, under a sun already searing hot, officers and volunteers gathered near a murky creek cutting through Robin Hood Hills. Deputy Tim Carter waded through the shallow water, a sense of dread heavy in his gut. Suddenly his boot hit something soft, something that didn't belong. He froze, then slowly crouched down to investigate. What he saw made his breath catch, a small, pale arm. "Over here!" he shouted, his voice breaking. The officers rushed over, and the creek bed revealed its grisly secrets. Three small, lifeless bodies, naked, bound, and brutally beaten, floated amidst the tangled weeds. The horror was unimaginable. Back at the station, news of the discovery spread like wildfire. Police Chief Bob Sanders stood with his arms crossed, face etched with concern. "We need answers," he muttered. "The town is scared and they need someone to blame." His gaze fell on the lead investigator, Inspector Gary Gitchell. "Find whoever did this fast." Days later, amidst a frenzy of public fear and rumor, three names emerged: Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley. Teenagers on the fringe of town society. Echols, dark-haired with a brooding demeanor. Baldwin, quiet and shy. Misskelley, vulnerable with a childlike mind. The town murmured in suspicion. Wasn't Echols always talking about the occult? Didn't they wear black and listen to heavy metal music? The boys became easy targets. In a dim interrogation room, a detective leaned over the table, staring into Jessie Misskelley's wide, confused eyes. "We know you did it, Jessie. You and your friends. Tell us what happened," the detective urged. Jessie, hands shaking, stammered, I don't know. I was at home." "Just tell us the truth, Jessie," the detective pressed, voice softening with a deceptive calm. "Your friends already told us everything." "Damien did it," Jessie whispered after hours of relentless questioning. "He made us go with him." His words were slurred, his mind struggling to keep up. The confession, incoherent and filled with contradictions, was what the police wanted, a story. From that moment on, the fate of the three teens was sealed. The town believed they had their monsters, yet behind closed doors, shadows of doubt crept in. Had they truly caught the killers, or had they merely created them? The small community of West Memphis trembled in the aftermath of the horrific discovery. As news of the murders spread, fear gripped the town. At the local diner, hushed whispers filled the air, and eyes darted nervously at every stranger. The parents of the three boys, pale and exhausted, were gathered in the police station's small waiting room, their faces marked by a mixture of grief and confusion. Sheriff Sanders, with furrowed brows and an expression of grim determination, stood before his team. "We need a break in this case," he declared, pounding his fist on the desk. "These boys deserve justice and the town is demanding answers." Over the next few days, the investigation unfolded with a sense of urgency bordering on desperation. At the forefront was Damien Echols, a teenager known around town for his dark clothing, fascination with the occult, and piercing gaze. His friend Jason Baldwin, a quiet, artistic boy with long hair, and Jessie Misskelley, a teenager with intellectual disabilities, were also pulled into the spotlight. The town, already stirred by rumors, was quick to turn suspicion into accusation. In a dimly lit interrogation room, Jessie Misskelley sat alone, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. Two detectives entered, their voices sharp but insidiously gentle. "Jessie," one of them began, pulling up a chair close to him, "we know you were there. Just tell us what happened." Jessie, bewildered, stammered, I wasn't there, sir. I swear I don't know nothing." He was scared, his eyes darting to the door as if seeking an escape. The detective leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "Your friends already told us everything. You don't want to go down for something they did, do you?" Jessie shook his head, his voice quavering. "No, sir, I don't." Hours passed, the questions came harder, faster, more insistent. The room grew hotter, the air thick with tension. Misskelley, weary and confused, was repeatedly fed details of the crime. "Just say it, Jessie," the detective urged. "Just say Damien did it and you were there. That's all you need to say, and you can go home." Jessie's eyes filled with tears. "Damien, he did it," he whispered, barely audible. "He made us do it. I was scared." The detective smiled, satisfied. "Good, Jessie. That's what we needed to hear." Outside the interrogation room, Sheriff Sanders looked through the glass, a dark expression clouding his features. "We've got them," he muttered, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "We've got them." Meanwhile, in the community, the news spread like wildfire. The satanic teenagers had been caught. The people of West Memphis, gripped by fear, felt a strange sense of relief. But beneath the surface, the shadow of doubt began to grow. Was this really justice, or just a rush to judgment? Jessie Misskelley's coerced confession, given without a lawyer or a parent present, would soon be the linchpin of a case that would become infamous. He had given the police what they wanted, a story that pointed to guilt. But was it the truth? As the investigation moved forward, questions lingered. Had the authorities found the true killers, or had they simply found three convenient scapegoats? The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial began in 1994. The prosecution painted a chilling picture, a story of a satanic ritual gone terribly wrong. The jury, a mix of skeptical and terrified faces, listened intently. District Attorney John Fogelman stood before them, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "These three boys," he declared, pointing towards the defendant's table, "are not just killers. They are monsters. They worship the devil and they murdered those children in cold blood." Damien Echols sat at the defense table, his face a mask of defiance. He whispered to Jason Baldwin beside him, "They're trying to bury us alive, man." Jason, the youngest of the three, nodded, his eyes wide and fearful. Jessie Misskelley sat quietly, head down, looking as if he barely understood the gravity of the moment. The prosecution's case rested heavily on Misskelley's confession, a confession given after 12 hours of intense questioning, without a lawyer present. But the confession was riddled with inconsistencies. Parts of it did not match the evidence. Still, the prosecutor pressed on, replaying snippets of the taped confession for the jury. Misskelley's mumbled words echoed through the courtroom. "Damien and Jason, they hurt them boys. They made me watch." Defense attorney Dan Stidham stood up, his face flushed with frustration. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, turning to the jury, "Jessie Misskelley has an IQ of 72. He didn't even understand half the questions he was asked. They fed him information and he repeated it back under duress. The trial of the West Memphis Three began in 1994, under a cloud of suspicion and hysteria. The courtroom was packed. Families of the victims, reporters, and townsfolk filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the defendants, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley. As the judge called the court to order, the air seemed heavy with anticipation, like a storm about to break. District Attorney John Fogelman took center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "we are here to seek justice for three innocent boys who were brutally murdered. The evidence will show that these three young men committed this crime in an act of satanic ritual. Damien Echols was the ringleader, Jason Baldwin his willing accomplice, and Jessie Misskelley the reluctant follower." His words struck like a hammer, his tone a mix of righteousness and condemnation. The prosecution laid out its case, built largely on Misskelley's confession. Over and over, they replayed the tape where Misskelley, under intense questioning, described how the murders happened. The confession was inconsistent, shifting with every retelling, but it was the centerpiece of the prosecution's argument. "Jessie's words are enough," Fogelman insisted, because he was there. Defense attorney Dan Stidham rose, pushing back against the narrative. Jessie Misskelley has the IQ of a child, he argued, voice rising. He was questioned for hours without his parents, without a lawyer. He was scared, confused, and led to say what the police wanted to hear. He pointed to the lack of physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, nothing directly linking the boys to the crime scene. If they committed these horrific acts, where is the proof? Stidham demanded. But the courtroom was gripped by a different kind of evidence. The eerie, unsettling feeling of a community caught in a wave of fear. The media dubbed it a satanic panic. Witnesses were called who spoke of Damien's interest in the occult. One woman, her voice trembling, testified, "He used to talk about witchcraft, about the devil. I just knew something was off about him." Echols' defense attorney, Val Price, looked to the jury, trying to dispel the myths. "We're here to try a murder case, not to judge a boy because he reads different books or wears black clothes," he said. But the words seemed to fall flat against a wall of prejudice and fear. After days of heated arguments, the jury left to deliberate. Hours turned into days, tension thick in the air. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman, with a solemn expression, read the verdicts. Damien Echols, guilty of capital murder in the first degree. Jason Baldwin, guilty of capital murder. Jessie Misskelley, guilty of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. Gasps and cries erupted in the courtroom. Echols stood still, defiant, while Baldwin broke down, tears streaming down his face. Misskelley seemed almost unaware of the finality of it all. The judge's voice cut through the noise. Damien Echols is sentenced to death by lethal injection. Jason Baldwin, life without the possibility of parole. Jessie Misskelley, life plus 40 years. Outside, reporters clamored for statements, but the families of the victims and the accused were silent, each grappling with their own grief and disbelief. Inside, the prosecution celebrated a victory, but the defense team huddled together, knowing they had lost not just a case, but perhaps justice itself. As Damien was led away in handcuffs, he turned and called back, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." And indeed it wasn't. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and in the years to come, they would grow into a movement that would challenge everything the court had decided on that fateful day. Years passed and the West Memphis Three sat behind bars, but their case was far from forgotten. Public interest grew, fueled by a growing unease over the trial's fairness and the possibility that an injustice had been done. Documentaries like Paradise Lost shed new light on the case, drawing the attention of celebrities, legal experts, and everyday citizens who began to ask the same question. Were Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley truly guilty? In 2007, a breakthrough arrived, a glimmer of hope buried deep in a mound of legal documents and scientific advancements. New DNA testing techniques, unavailable in 1994, were applied to the evidence from the crime scene. The results were staggering. None of the DNA collected matched Echols, Baldwin, or Misskelley. Instead, a strand of hair was found that potentially belonged to Terry Hobbs, the stepfather of one of the victims. At a press conference, defense attorney Dennis Riordan held up the forensic report. "Ladies and gentlemen, this evidence is exculpatory. It clears Damien, Jason, and Jessie. It proves that they were not at the scene of the crime," he declared, his voice filled with urgency. Yet, despite the new evidence, the wheels of justice moved slowly. Allegations of jury misconduct began to surface, further casting doubt on the fairness of the original trial. A former juror, speaking anonymously, admitted, "There was a lot of talk, even before deliberations began. People were afraid. We all knew what the prosecution wanted us to do." Behind prison walls, Damien Echols wrote furiously in his journal. "They'll never let us out," he muttered, glancing over at Jason Baldwin in the adjacent cell. "Not without a fight." Jason, thinner now but with a quiet strength, nodded. "But we have to keep trying. We can't let them win like this." Meanwhile, Jessie Misskelley, still haunted by his coerced confession, struggled to understand what had happened. In a rare interview, he broke down. "I didn't know what I was saying. They kept telling me what to say, over and over. I just wanted to go home. The legal battle intensified. Riordan and the defense team filed motion after motion, appealing for a new trial, arguing that Misskelley's confession had been obtained under duress and was fundamentally flawed. The state fought back, reluctant to revisit a case they believed was closed. Finally, in 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court ordered a new evidentiary hearing, citing the new DNA evidence and potential jury misconduct as grounds for reconsideration. The state was placed under immense pressure to justify its case against the three men. The defense team gathered, the tension palpable. "We've got them on the ropes," Riordan said, pacing the room. "They know their case is crumbling. We just need to push harder." The pressure mounted, and the tide of public opinion continued to shift. Celebrities like Johnny Depp, Eddie Vedder, and Peter Jackson publicly supported the West Memphis Three, advocating for their release. With the weight of new evidence mounting public support and the glaring flaws in the original case, the state faced a critical decision: proceed with another trial or negotiate a deal. In 2011, the state made an unprecedented offer, an offered plea, allowing the men to maintain their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict them. It was a legal maneuver, a compromise of sorts. The defense team debated fiercely. "This is a chance at freedom, but it's not exoneration," Riordan said, looking at Damien, Jason, and Jessie. "You'll be free but not cleared. It's up to you." Damien, tired and worn from years on death row, looked at Jason and Jessie. "I'd rather die a free man than live another day in this hell," he said quietly. Jason nodded in agreement. "We have to take it. We need to get out and fight this from the outside." On August 19th, 2011, after 18 years in prison, the West Memphis Three were released. But as they walked out of the courthouse into the blinding sunlight, they knew the battle was far from over. They were free, but their names were not yet cleared. The quest for true justice had only just begun. For years, the West Memphis Three languished in prison, but their hope remained alive through a relentless series of legal appeals. Each appeal presented a chance to overturn their convictions, yet each time, the courts rejected them, citing procedural grounds or the belief that no new, credible evidence existed. The weight of despair grew heavy, but outside the prison walls, a movement was building, a movement that refused to let them be forgotten. In 2007, new DNA evidence emerged, failing to link any of the three defendants to the crime scene. The defense team, led by attorney Dennis Riordan, seized upon this development. "This isn't just a crack in their case," Riordan argued in court, his voice resonating with urgency. "It's a gaping hole." Yet, the appeals were repeatedly dismissed, the legal system unwilling to overturn the convictions despite growing doubts. Public support began to swell. In a packed courtroom, supporters held signs reading, "Free the West Memphis Three." Celebrities like Johnny Depp and Eddie Vedder used their platforms to amplify the cause. At a rally, Depp declared, "This is not just a fight for their freedom. This is a fight against injustice everywhere." The pressure mounted, and the state found itself facing a wave of scrutiny. Despite these setbacks, hope flickered. In 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court finally agreed to hear new evidence, including DNA findings and allegations of jury misconduct. The courtroom was charged with tension. The defense presented a compelling case, citing new forensics and the inconsistencies in Misskelley's confession. "This is our best shot," whispered Jason Baldwin to Damien Echols. Damien nodded, eyes narrowed. "It has to be." But the state had another strategy. Prosecutor Scott Ellington, aware of the growing tide against him, approached the defense with a proposal. In a closed-door meeting, he laid it out. "An Alford plea," he said, "allows you to maintain your innocence while acknowledging that we have enough evidence to convict. You get out, but the conviction stands." Damien Echols, gaunt and pale from years on death row, looked at his lawyer, then back at Ellington. "So we walk free, but we're still guilty in the eyes of the law?" he asked, his voice edged with bitterness. Ellington nodded. "That's the deal." The room fell silent. Jason Baldwin, now in his 30s but with the haunted eyes of someone far older, spoke up. "Damien, you've been on death row. You've lost years. We've all lost years. I don't want to accept this, but it's our only way out. Jessie Misskelley, still struggling with his own guilt over his coerced confession, finally said, "I just want to go home." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of 18 years of lost freedom. Echols turned to his attorneys. "I want to be free," he whispered, "but I want to be innocent." He paused, thinking of the years spent fighting, the darkness, the fear, the loss. "We have to do this," he said finally. "We take the plea, we get out, and we keep fighting." On August 19th, 2011, in a small, packed courtroom, the West Memphis Three entered their Alford pleas. The judge, with a somber expression, addressed them. "You are free to go." A collective gasp went through the courtroom, relief and disbelief intertwined. Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley stepped out into the bright sunlight, free men for the first time in almost 2 decades. But as they embraced, tears in their eyes, there was a lingering question that hung in the air. Were they truly free? The Alford plea had released them from prison, but it had not exonerated them. They would leave, but the label of convicted murderers would follow them into their new lives. As they faced the crowd of supporters and flashing cameras, Damien turned to the others and said, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of the next fight." And with that, they walked into the future, determined to clear their names no matter how long it took. After 18 long years in prison, the West Memphis Three, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley, were finally released in 2011 under an Alford plea. The courtroom was filled with a tense, expectant silence as the judge read the decision. The court accepts the Alford pleas of all 3 defendants. You are hereby free to go. There were tears, cheers, and disbelief from their supporters, while the 3 men exchanged cautious glances, grappling with the strange reality of their newfound freedom. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed, cameras flashing. Echols, blinking in the harsh sunlight, looked both relieved and haunted. "We're free," he whispered to Baldwin, who nodded but remained tense. "Free, but not innocent," Baldwin replied. "Not yet." The trio stepped into a world that had changed dramatically since their imprisonment. Smartphones, social media, a different culture altogether. But one thing remained constant: the relentless fight to clear their names. The Alford plea had freed them physically, but legally, they were still considered guilty of a crime they vehemently denied committing. They were determined to keep fighting, to seek exoneration and compensation for the years stolen from them. Damien Echols, who had spent most of those years on death row, appeared on various talk shows and interviews telling his story. "I lived in a cell, awaiting execution for something I didn't do," he told a packed audience at a book signing event. His memoir, Life After Death, became a bestseller, shedding light on the horrors he endured and the resilience that kept him going. Baldwin joined Echols on the speaking circuit, often saying, "We may be out, but we're not done fighting." Their case continued to draw significant public attention. Documentaries such as West of Memphis, produced by Peter Jackson, and Paradise Lost 3, Purgatory dug deeper into the flaws in the investigation and prosecution. "This isn't over," Jackson declared at a film screening, standing beside Echols and Baldwin. "We're going to make sure their names are cleared." Amidst this surge of public and media support, the 3 men began filing for compensation, citing wrongful imprisonment. Their lawyers argued in courtrooms across Arkansas, presenting new evidence and highlighting the numerous procedural errors and misconduct that had led to their convictions. Still, the state resisted. Prosecutor Scott Ellington, the same man who had proposed the Alford plea, remained adamant. The convictions were solid, he insisted at a press conference. The plea was a compromise, not an admission of error. The battle for exoneration dragged on, with Echols and his co-defendants speaking out whenever they could. "We lost 18 years, Echols told a packed audience at a legal conference, but we won't lose the fight for the truth." In the aftermath of their release, the trio's case became a lightning rod for debates on justice, wrongful convictions, and the role of public opinion in legal processes. Books were written, Podcasts recorded and new legal scholars debated the intricacies of their case. Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley knew they were far from the end of their journey, but they also knew they were no longer alone. As they walked out of the courthouse after yet another hearing, a journalist called out, "Do you think you'll ever be exonerated?" Echols paused, his face resolute. "I have to believe that we will," he replied, "because believing in anything else means believing that justice isn't possible, and I refuse to believe that." The West Memphis Three were free, but their story continued, now shaped not by the shadow of death row, but by a dogged pursuit of truth and redemption, one legal battle at a time. Years after their release, the West Memphis Three, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley, remain locked in a legal and emotional battle for complete exoneration. Though they are no longer behind bars, the label of convicted murderers continues to cast a long shadow over their lives. Their quest for true justice, for the removal of the stain on their names, is far from over. In 2022, Damien Echols spearheaded new efforts to utilize advanced DNA testing techniques, hoping to uncover definitive evidence that would finally clear their names. "Technology has come a long way since 1993, Echols explained in an interview with a major news outlet. "We're asking for the chance to use it, to prove once and for all that we had nothing to do with those murders." The state, however, has been less than cooperative. Prosecutors have resisted these requests, arguing that the case is closed and that the offered plea should stand. "We're not reopening the case," one official said bluntly. "The evidence was sufficient then, and it remains sufficient now." Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley, however, refused to accept this. "They took 18 years from us," Jason Baldwin said at a recent press conference, his voice steady but filled with quiet determination. "We're not asking for those years back. We know that's impossible. But we are asking for the truth. We're asking for our names." The ongoing legal battle has significant implications, not just for the three men, but for the broader justice system. Their case has become emblematic of the flaws in the American legal process, of how public fear, prosecutorial misconduct, and flawed evidence can lead to life-altering mistakes. It has sparked debates in legal circles and beyond, with many questioning how such a case could ever have resulted in convictions. Meanwhile, the story of the West Memphis Three continues to resonate with the public. New documentaries and books are in development, and the trio's story is often cited in discussions about wrongful convictions. "We're not giving up," Jessie Misskelley said in a rare interview. "They may think this is over, but it's not. Not until we're fully exonerated." Despite the legal hurdles, the trio remains hopeful. "We've come this far," Echols recently told a crowded room at a book signing. "And we're going to keep going, because the truth matters. It always has, and it always will." Their journey, marked by pain, perseverance, and a relentless pursuit of justice, continues to unfold. The West Memphis Three may be free, but the fight for their names and for justice remains ongoing with no clear end in sight.